Okay, let's jump right into this explainer with a statement that literally shocked the world and set off an absolute geopolitical firestorm. The single quote from December 2024 perfectly frames the massive global stakes surrounding one tremendous island. When former US President Donald Trump stated that ownership of Greenland is an absolute necessity, a lot of people initially brushed it off as a bizarre joke. But as we're about to see, the motivations behind this statement are deeply, deeply rooted in reality.
Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to decode this complex, high-stakes intersection of superpower competition, the green energy transition, and climate change. All of it centered right here in Greenland. We're going to unpack exactly why the world's most powerful nations are suddenly so hyper-focused on this Arctic territory, and more importantly, what it means for the people who actually call it home.
There's a Greenlandic word, sikukungitsuk, that perfectly foreshadows the ultimate existential threat we're going to uncover by the end of our journey today. It translates to a sea with no ice. And that's a terrifying concept when you realize the Arctic is warming 2 to 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. But ironically, it's exactly this rapid melting of ice that's making Greenland so incredibly attractive to foreign powers right now. The shrinking ice is quite literally uncovering new opportunities and an entirely new threats.
Which brings us to part 1. The absurd real estate pitch.
57,000. That is the entire population of Greenland. To put that into perspective, we are talking about a territory roughly the size of Western Europe, but with fewer inhabitants than a small American city. And yet, this semi-autonomous territory of Denmark is suddenly being openly courted for acquisition by the United States. It's a pretty unprecedented scenario in modern times, right? A superpower openly trying to buy a massive landmass from an allied nation.
Let's look at how we got here in part 2, a geopolitical tug-of-war.
Now, you might be thinking these recent demands to control Greenland are a brand new obsession. Actually, the U.S. has been strategically utilizing and seeking out this island all the way back to the 1860s. Fast forward to World War II, and a 1941 defense agreement essentially turned Greenland into a vital U.S. staging ground. Then, during the Cold War, the massive Thule Air Base became this absolutely critical node for radar and anti-missile shields. So Washington's interest isn't new at all, it's just becoming a whole lot more public and aggressive.
And that American urgency? It's being driven by a very real environmental shift. As that Arctic ice melts, highly valuable shipping routes are opening up. In response, Russia has been reopening old Soviet-era bases, essentially declaring itself the king of the Arctic. Meanwhile, China officially integrated the far north into its 2017 Polar Silk Road strategy. So, almost overnight, the Arctic is becoming heavily militarized across space, air, land, and undersea domains. And the U.S. is terrified of falling behind the curve.
It's fascinating to watch how global leaders are reacting to all this. Take Russian President Vladimir Putin's reaction. He basically supported the idea of a U.S. acquisition of Greenland. This highlights a really interesting geopolitical pivot. Impartially speaking, by validating the idea that superpowers can just negotiate the transfer of vast territories, it challenges the whole post-World War II international order. It potentially legitimizes unilateral border changes in other parts of the world.
And you can bet that makes European allies incredibly nervous, leading directly to some major European pushback. This kind of rhetoric has profoundly rattled traditional alliances. French President Emmanuel Macron actually visited Greenland's capital, Nuuk, specifically to signal that Europe isn't just going to stand by if overseas territories are treated like tradable commodities. The trust between Denmark and the U.S. has fractured to the point that Denmark recently chose to buy French and Italian air defense systems instead of American ones. There's this growing unofficial consensus that Europe just has to build its own independent military capabilities in the Arctic.
Let's pivot to the economics in part 3, the mineral El Dorado.
If you want to understand Greenland's position in all this, you have to follow the money. Over half of their national budget, 54% to be exact, comes from outside funding, primarily a massive block grant from Denmark and the EU. For Greenland to ever achieve its long-held dream of full independence, they have to replace that 54% with their own domestic revenue. And that is a monumental, almost overwhelming challenge for such a small population. But the answer to that financial challenge might just be hiding right beneath their feet. Greenland possesses an estimated 43 out of the 60 minerals that U.S. authorities categorize as strictly critical for the green transition and the global defense industry. We're talking about rare earth elements that are absolutely essential for everything from your electric vehicle to advanced fighter jets. Right now, China heavily dominates this supply chain, and the West is desperately searching for an alternative.
But for the locals, this is a massive double-edged sword.
Take the huge deposits at Quantarsut, for example. On one hand, the economic promise is staggering. We're looking at a century of mining value, high-paying jobs, and a direct path to financial independence. On the other hand, the environmental risk is equally severe. Extracting these rare earths can produce radioactive uranium waste. Locals are genuinely terrified that high winds could spread toxic dust over their pristine ecosystem, which would completely devastate the farming and fishing industries they rely on right now. It's an excruciating dilemma.
Which brings us to the human element in Part 4, the push for independence.
So, to achieve true independence from Denmark, Greenland has to wildly diversify its economy, because right now, a staggering 90% of their exports come from just one thing, the fishing industry. You simply cannot build a modern, independent, resilient nation on a single pillar, especially one that is so vulnerable to climate change. They really need the capital that mining and foreign investment could bring, but they want it on their own terms.
And look, we absolutely cannot understand this passionate push for self-determination without acknowledging some very deep historical trauma. Back in the 1960s, the Danish healthcare system administered IUD contraceptives to roughly 4,000 Greenlandic women and girls. Some were as young as 12, and many of them did not give consent. This horrific campaign literally halved the birth rate. It's dark colonial chapters like this that fuel the modern insistence that Greenlanders and Greenlanders alone will dictate how their country and their resources are utilized moving forward.
And finally, Part 5, the true value. Ice.
While superpowers are fighting over shipping lanes and rare earth minerals in boardrooms thousands of miles away, the locals in places like Ilulissat are dealing with a totally different, intensely physical reality right in their backyards. Ilulissat is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but today it is quite literally the epicenter of climate change. The permafrost is melting so rapidly that it is cracking the foundations of homes. Houses are actually sinking into the earth.
Okay, let's zoom out and put this into a global perspective. 7 meters. That is how much global sea levels will rise if Greenland's ice sheet comes off the land and fully melts into the ocean. Up to 7 meters. We aren't just talking about a little extra coastal flooding here. We are talking about entire island nations like the Maldives sinking beneath the waves permanently.
The human scale of an event like that is hard to even wrap your head around. A 7-meter sea level rise would displace roughly 500 million people worldwide. 500 million people. It would cause trillions upon trillions of dollars in economic damage and spark global migration crises that no border wall or military defense system could ever hope to contain.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, we're really left with a sobering thought. While the world's greatest superpowers posture and threaten and negotiate to control the mineral wealth beneath the ground, the true value of Greenland is actually sitting right on top of it. Shouldn't our ultimate global focus be entirely on ensuring that this ice stays frozen? Because if it doesn't, who owns the land underneath won't matter to anyone at all.